Zachsterman inside Indiana overtime, kind of doing a weird one tonight. I'm actually in Louisville for a wedding, um, and Alex and Ken covered the game, but the way everything's structured with overtime, I actually have the whole intro built into my computer. So, and I was able to get back and watch a lot of the second half. Obviously, followed the first half of Indiana's 41-35 loss to Navy tonight on Twitter. Was able to watch it for a little while on my phone. Don't tell my wife, but a disappointing loss and really kind of a jarring loss to come so early in the season for Indiana. I think there was a feeling like, as close as Indiana was to beating Navy in Annapolis last year, they lost 31-30 on a late Navy rally. That even with some of the turnover on defense, losing Adam Replogle and Larry Black in particular, that the defense would be better against the run, the option, and that the offense certainly would be better. Offense was a little bit better. Really struggled. First two drives, 3-and-out with Trey Roberson. Once Nate Sudfeld got in, I think it was a 3-and-out and a 4-and-out. Indiana did not punt the rest of the night, but Sudfeld did throw an interception in the red zone, which proved to be costly because Indiana wound up losing by one possession, 41-35. And this was just kind of, you can talk about the triple option, and we can do that in a second, but this was kind of one of those nights where you just felt like Indiana maybe just missed on, sorry, that was my, forgive me, that was my computer making a weird noise, but just missed on some of those little plays. I mean, again, Sudfeld's intercepted at the 3. Nick Stoner had his hands on the onside kick at the end of the game and missed it. TJ Simmons had Keenan Reynolds lined up, and Reynolds cut back and got just enough, one extra yard on fourth down on Navy's last drive to get the first down after burning through Indiana's remaining timeouts and win the game. I know some people question why Kevin Wilson called that first timeout, but I think he'd probably tell you, if that first time it was about 7.5 minutes left, but I think he'd probably tell you that he would rather have started playing clock management then, because if you do stop Reynolds there, you probably get the ball back without very good field position and about a minute left. If you don't call the timeout with 7.5 left and you let Navy run an extra 30, 40 seconds off the clock. So it would have set, in that situation, actually, I think the tight end or the timeout gamble worked, because it would have, if Indiana could have gotten a stop on fourth down, set them up with a little less than 2 minutes left, I think about 1:45 or so left to drive down the field, try and score to win the game. So actually, I do think that timeout gamble by Wilson worked, but again, it was really just kind of, it's a lot of what we saw last year. Indiana lost 4 one-possession games last year. They lost to Michigan State by 4, Ohio State by 3, Navy by 1, Ball State by 2. And those are the kinds of games that turn on like just a handful of plays, and you don't even really notice them when they happen. But then you add them up at the end of the game, and you see where it is. And you talk about the Sudfeld interception. Again, you talk about, I think Navy converted 4 fourth downs. And Navy is a team that goes for it a lot on fourth down. They've converted 3. Navy is a team that goes for a lot on fourth down. They don't punt a lot. Anytime they get across the 50, they're going to go for it on fourth down, because that's an offense that's designed to just kind of very methodically churn out 3, 4 yards. And it's an offense that when it's run right, the ball is always moving downhill. And I will admit to being a fan of that offense in the right setting. And Navy has certainly been a very sort of prosperous setting for that offense for a long time now. Indiana's Kevin Wilson kind of, I think he said after the game that we could talk about it till we're blue in the face, but we're not going to face this offense again. That's true, I guess, unless, I don't know if there are permutations that could put Indiana up against Navy in a bowl game. Probably not, but they usually do try to avoid that stuff. They try to avoid regular season rematches. But, you did learn some things, not good things, but about Indiana's defensive line. Other than that, really, you don't get a lot for the rest of the season out of how you handle this team, but you do kind of get a sense for feeling like Indiana kept having these moments. Again, 3 converted fourth downs, a lot of moments where, Navy had, I think, 27 total first downs, averaged 6.3 yards per carry, so you don't feel very good probably about adjustments, and you just don't feel good about kind of situationally. Indiana got itself into some positions to maybe force some stops, turn momentum, and it couldn't do it. It could not make that happen. Indiana did not force any turnovers. That's the other problem. When this offense is generally pretty disciplined. I mean, one of the things about the option is generally it's recruited. The way it's recruited at Navy and at Georgia Tech is that it's an offense you'll see a lot of more experienced players, a lot of guys who redshirt their freshman year. So by the time they're playing, they've been in the offense long enough to not make a lot of mistakes. Still, if you do it right defensively, you can force some fumbles, some bad pitches, things like that. And Indiana couldn't do that tonight, and that's a problem. It's going to be interesting to see where this team goes because there was a lot of confidence, and probably rightly so, in the preseason, I think. A lot of feeling like, the bowl hopes are justified, and this doesn't do away with that. I think you really could look at Indiana's schedule and feel like there's probably 8 or 9 games on the schedule, even right now, so I guess 5 or 6 games left, that you'd look at and say, I wouldn't be surprised if Indiana lost or Indiana won that game. I don't think the bowl hopes are gone, and I don't think that the way the defense played tonight means that Indiana is just beyond helping in terms of getting to that bowl level as a whole team. But I think what you do see tonight is what's going to be interesting from tonight is how Indiana kind of handles a body blow, because this team was very confident, and you kind of got the feeling if it could start 3-0, 4-0, get into Big Ten play with a little bit of momentum, it would feel like, okay, we figured this out. We are as good as we thought we were. Because, for all the cliches about it, you really don't know how to win in college football until you can, or until you have. You don't know how to make those little plays, how to close out games, or how to manage games, or how to maybe just again make that one extra play that puts you over the top, gets you the score you need, or gets you the one stop you need. Indiana did not force any punts from Navy tonight. And until you figure that out, until you do it, you really haven't quite figured it out. And I know that's very cliche, but I think by and large it is true. And it's, how this team kind of handles a game like this that maybe is a little bit of a gut check earlier than you'd expect, and is certainly one where there's going to be a lot of outside doubt after a loss like this. I mean, there just is. And whether or not there's a lot of inside doubt is probably kind of key, or doubt within the program suddenly springing up is probably a big key for Indiana's season. But, this is still a pretty young team. Kevin Wilson is fond of saying that it returns a ton of starters. I think it's top 10 in most return snaps or return starters in 2000 from last season, but it's also top 10 in fewest seniors. This is a team that's still pretty young, and how it handles the next 7 days and the next 14 days. I mean, I think we learn a lot more about Indiana, not so much from the loss to Navy, but how they respond from that loss. Against Bowling Green, which is going to be a tough team. The Falcons are good. They're good at what they do. They went to a bowl game last year. And then Missouri, which is probably a team that probably feels a little bit like it's in a similar situation to Indiana. Could be good enough to squeeze into a bowl game this year, not really sure. Also, perhaps a team that's a little bit overmatched in a tougher conference. So I think that we learned more about Indiana really from how they respond to losing to Navy, much more so than how they lost to Navy, because as Wilson said, it is fair to say you aren't going to see the option again, and you're not going to see an offense that looks a lot like it again unless you play Air Force, Army, or Georgia Tech in a bowl game. And Indiana's obviously got a long way to go to be talking about that. The quarterback situation does seem solved to some extent. Nate Sudfeld, 31 of 42, 363 yards, 4 more touchdowns. The interception's big, but at the same time, he had the offense moving all night. Kevin Wilson talked about wanting more balance than Indiana got, and they finished the game with 118 rushing yards. Devin Coleman had 8 for 34. Nate Sudfeld, actually, with 6 carries for 35 yards, was Indiana's leading rusher and had their best yards per carry average. So it wasn't a good night for the running game, but it was also one where the slow start combined with Navy's fast start really had Indiana playing behind the 8 ball and throwing the ball a lot from the beginning. 42 passes against a team like Navy that is going to eat up so much of the game. Navy had the ball for 33 minutes and 14 seconds. Indiana only had it for, those numbers don't quite add up, but Navy had a massive, I'm just looking at a stat sheet in front of me, Navy had a massive time of possession advantage, and that's what they do is they limit the number of snaps you get. It's a lot like, if you want a good basketball analogy, it's a lot like playing a Bo Ryan Wisconsin team. They limit your possession so much that if you don't get quality possessions early, you feel like you're spending almost the entire game playing from behind, and you have to hit a little stretch where you're making all the little plays, and you are forcing the game to get turned around, and Indiana really just couldn't do it tonight. You would feel probably like with 8 touchdowns in his first 2 games, 2 very good games in his first 2, that Nate Sudfeld has probably the inside track on starting from here on out. I don't think Trey Roberson is gone from the offense. And if you do want a positive, I know there are a lot of people who have felt that the quarterback situation needed to be solved. You would think this might do it, or at least that this earns Sudfeld the right to walk out there first against Bowling Green. But it's, long term, it's a disappointing night. And it's one, again, I think we learn more about Indiana from how they respond to the Navy loss than really how they lost to Navy, because we all kind of know how they lost to Navy. They just couldn't handle the offense, couldn't corral it nearly enough. But that is also an offense that Indiana's not going to see again in the regular season. They're probably not going to see anything that close to it either, really close to it at all. So it's more about how a young team that believes in itself, but maybe suddenly is going to be told that there are doubts elsewhere, handles some pretty significant adversity. So, I know Kevin Wilson has actually talked a lot in the last 2 years about how he feels Indiana has not, in his time in Bloomington, handled adversity well as a team or a program. So, again, I think the next 2 weeks are as crucial, if not more crucial, to the rest of Indiana's season as tonight was. I think Indiana could have afforded to lose one of these non-conference games, but for it to come so early, and still make a bowl, that is, but for it to come so early is going to be something that this team has to overcome mentally, emotionally, whatever. We'll have a lot more coverage, obviously. Sorry I'm doing this from my hotel room, but this has been Inside Indiana Overtime. I'm Zach Osterman, and I promise next week we'll be back to a full complement. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon.